Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well and the rest of your semester went well. This is the presentation for my thesis, Political Corruption in Venezuela. So, keeping in mind that I am a biochemistry major, this seems like a strange topic for me to pick, um, but I actually have a Spanish minor as well that I finished after my sophomore year. So, I'm pretty well versed in Spanish-speaking population cultures and the language, and I've always been pretty interested in it. And then for Honors 189, I had to do that I actually took last semester. I did we had to do a current events paper for our final paper somewhere around the world, and I chose Venezuela because I had a little bit of knowledge about it, and I knew that it was pretty messed up. Um, but all I was able to talk about in that paper was the current situation, and I was curious more about the history and what had been happening in Venezuela in the past that led them to what's going on now. So I chose to do two different changes in the Constitution and a few of the presidents, a few of the more notable presidents under each of those constitutions. The first one I looked at was the Republic of Venezuela. That change was made in 1953 by Marcos Perez Jimenez. And the big change that happens between the previous constitution and this one is that he gave the people democratic voting rights. So the president and all their other elected positions had to be done by a direct democratic election, which was the most power that the people in Venezuela had had in history up until that point. And then in 1999, Hugo Chavez came in and made some changes to the constitution that renamed it to the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. And the big thing here is Hugo Chavez made changes that basically consolidated power from the rest of the government into the presidency and into the hands of the people. So we're going to go to Marcos Perez Jimenez, who, as I mentioned, was the leader that passed the constitution that changed, that gave voting rights to the people of Venezuela. So one thing he did towards the end of his term was he attempted to pass a referendum that would extend his term as well as the terms of all the different government officials, like the governors, but they wouldn't hold new elections. And to make sure this referendum passed, because the people of Venezuela didn't want it, they had just gotten their voting rights, and this was essentially them not being able to use those. He changed the results of the referendum, which made it look like it won, and that led to him being overthrown in 1958 from a coup d'etat. Next, we'll move on to Rafael Caldera. He served under the same constitution, and something that was notable about him, he served two different terms under two different parties, actually. So for his first term, he was under the Democratic Action Party, which is also known as the Christian Democrats Party. And when he came to his second term, he ran under a new party he made called the National Convergence Party, because he was closely tied with Chavez, who was closely tied to Fidel Castro of Cuba, which the Christian Democrats did not like, so they didn't want him as their candidate, and he chose to make a new party and ended up winning the election. So something that was very notable about him, his first term, when he took power in 1969, was the first time in Venezuelan history that power had changed hands between parties without any military action. So this was obviously a big stepping stone for Venezuela. He wasn't necessarily corrupt in the way that the other presidents I'm talking about were, where he's taking power for himself or funneling money in illegal ways. But the thing that people didn't like about him, like I mentioned, was his relationship with Chavez. People didn't really trust Chavez or Castro at this time, and Chavez had just attempted a few coups d'etats and was currently in jail when he was elected. So the first thing he did after he got election was to pardon Chavez and get him out of jail, which just sort of added fuel to the fire of the people that were saying that he was just basically a pawn of Chavez, and through Chavez, Castro. So now we'll move on to Hugo Chavez. He, like I mentioned before, was the one that made the changes in the Constitution that consolidated power between him and the people of Venezuela, so the poor people or the masses. Um, and for doing this, this was basically what he did throughout his presidency was he got more power himself and gave more power to the people by taking power away from the rest of the government. Um, and one big thing about him was that he had a very staunch right wing opposition um, that tried to do everything they could to take him down. So, what they did, um, a lot of the right wing opposition were the people that led the oil industry um, and basically upheld their economy. So, what they did was they went on strike in order to basically destroy the economy, trying to get the people of Venezuela to turn on Hugo Chavez. And while they were very successful in uprooting the economy of Venezuela, the people of Venezuela um, did not turn away from Hugo Chavez. So all they really did was hurt their country in the end. And Hugo Chavez, he was diagnosed with cancer in 2011, and he ended up dying from the cancer in 2013. Um, After that, he basically handed power over to Nicolas Maduro, his vice president at the time, which is strange considering this is now a democratic system. But he was so beloved by the people of Venezuela that they didn't really see it as an issue. They were just hoping Maduro would be the next Chavez. So, like I mentioned, Maduro was the successor to Chavez. He is currently the president of Venezuela to some people, and others say he is not. And this is because he rigged the election in 2018. So how he did this was he he jailed or barred basically the more popular candidates in his opposition from running to ensure that the people that would potentially beat him in the election wouldn't be able to run at all. And this caused the voter turnout in the 2013 election, um, when he was elected more legitimately, was about 93%. And in this 2018 election, it was about 45%. So the people in Venezuela, when they weren't allowed to vote for the candidate that they actually wanted to vote for, they chose not to vote at all, which allowed him to win the election technically. Um, but basically, based on the language in their constitution right now, that election wasn't legal, and so the rightful interim president right now is Juan Guaido, who is the leader of the National Assembly. So this is a very tense time in international politics when looking at Venezuela, because you have countries like the United States and various countries in Europe that are backing Guaido as the rightful interim president of Venezuela. And then you have countries like Russia and China that are backing Maduro as the rightful victor in the election, which is essentially just a democracy versus communism proxy thing going on in Venezuela right now. So to wrap it all up, this was the main point of my thesis. Why should we as Americans care about anything going on in Venezuela? You know, they're far away. Who cares? The first thing that we should care about is our oil imports or our economy. So Venezuela in 2013 accounted for about 800,000 barrels of oil coming into the U.S. every day, which was about 8% of our overall imports of anything in the United States. So we get a ridiculous amount of oil from them. So if there's turmoil in leadership in Venezuela or anything like that, it's going to mess with our economy and our oil prices. We also have a significant number of Venezuelan refugees in the United States right now. The only places with more refugees that have left Venezuela are Colombia, who has the most, and Peru, who has the second most. And then we're right behind them. And over 4 million people have left Venezuela at this point because of the political turmoil. So these are people that are currently living in our country, whether we realize it or not, and we should obviously be helping them. And the last reason is because we've signed something called the Inter-American Democratic Charter, which is basically a document that us and a bunch of other Latin American countries, I think it's 34 total, have signed, which is basically an agreement to uphold democracy and to help the other countries involved in the charter uphold democracy. So we've signed a document that makes it so we should be helping them and we should be working to restore democracy in their country. Looks like I went a little longer than 10 minutes, so I'll stop this now. Hope you are all doing well, and good luck.